Hey everybody, my name is Jason. I run JJ Realty Group. This video is geared to help you figure out how to protest taxes, at least as it pertains specifically with Bell County, but also this is going to be pretty good information for most of the state of Texas, so stay tuned. Okay, now that the intro is out of the way, here's a couple different things to kind of keep in mind. First of all, I don't protest taxes very much for anybody anymore. There are a few occasions where I will. You really want to focus on how to do this yourself, and that's what this video is designed to do. I would supply you with the data, and it is solid market data that I would use as a real estate agent to actually put your house on the market reasonably within the areas there. And that's the biggest term that we need to really focus on is what is reasonable to assume the property is worth. There are tons of different ways to determine what a market or a house's value really is. There's only one true way to determine what a property is actually worth. And this is something that I've actually used in the tax office before, is what someone is willing to pay for it. Now, the county has their ways of being able to pull the information. I'm not going to go into how that works here. It's kind of boring and it's not really going to make a difference in this particular case. But let me first start with the protest at forms as it pertains here. Now, I'm going to try to show you as best I can two different ways that you'll see a form that comes through and what you want to watch out for, and if you'll know whether or not it's worth your time. I always think it's worth your time, but I'll get on that here in a second. So the first things first is we're going to look at this here, and it's going to show two different values. There we go. You have a market value, which is this value that's up on top, and then you have an assessed value, which is this market value that's around here on the bottom. And then if you have any exemptions, that's going to be this little asterisk right here. Most of us, if we live here in Texas and we live in the area, are going to have a little homestead that's on there. So that are the two things. Now, I'm going to start going back and forth about market value and assessed value. You pay taxes on the assessed value. That's the second number that's underneath. They raise your taxes based on the market value. What you are protesting when you go down to the county is the market value. The goal, if you want to save money, is to figure out whether or not your market value can dip below your second assessed value. If this number can get lower, in this particular case, it was a house that was listed or marketed for $847,000 according to the county, and it was assessed after from just the time that they had on the property. There's lots of different reasons why that might be lower, at $799. I ended up getting that down to I think about $725. So pretty significant little bump. It does actually reduce that person's taxable burden by some margin. If you can't get below that number and all you can do is reduce the market value, there's still value to that, and I'll show you why here in a second. Here's a second way this might look. You have a total market value on this particular one of $300,000, and then the assessed value is the same. And of course, they've got their homestead on there. But if you look, the year prior, that was the same as well, right? Yes. So they can increase your homestead or your value, your assessed value, the part you pay taxes on, by 10%. But they can raise your market value as high as they can reasonably determine that they can raise it. And there are reasons why they are doing that, as given directives by the state of Texas to raise our property taxes as much as they possibly can, in layman's terms. But it would be advisable in this particular case because now it's a win-win no matter what you do. You get that market value down, it's going to go below your assessed value, you're going to save taxes. Great. If we can reasonably prove it, that's the main thing. What I supply are comparables, different things like that. I look at the market, take some time. It takes me about 30, 45 minutes to be able to pull a really good one, depending upon where it's at. If it's out in the country, it takes longer. But you've got maps if it's needed. In this particular case, it was a house that was way out in the country. I'm going to scroll through this because I have not redacted this information. But here is what you could expect if it's possible. Sometimes I have to do a different report because it's not always doable in this particular format. But you've got a full color analysis, what the assessed value would actually be compared to comparables on it, and some more information about those so you can compare numbers to numbers. Oftentimes you can look these up. Realtor.com is the best way to look for homes, historical photos if you want to print some of those off. And then I supply some other information as well with photos of what the property actually looked like. Now, I have a much better printer than I did back then, so hopefully it's a little bit better. But one of the things on this particular property I was able to determine was This was a property that had sold, and it's a much nicer location. It's a much nicer lot. Nice trees, maybe it had a stock tank, something like that. Whereas the property that he owned, completely bare. So it makes sense that if a property like that is selling for even more money or less money, that his is not going to be assessed very much because trees have actual real estate value. Now, how much that is, again, that's a different story. What this is kind of doing is setting an overview of what we think the market could reasonably bear for a house like this. And as we're starting to see, incremental dips within the market, it's more important now than ever to get it done. Even if, let's say, for example, we can't get below the assessed value. That's your market value, right? That's the second number here on the page. That's the number we want to try to get below. If we can't get it below, here's the reason why that could still be important for you to protest your taxes. Because if you can get your market value down, let's say it's 325 one year, now it's 350 this year, okay? But if you can get it to say maybe 340, then next year they have to start at 340 and then assess it up. If they haven't seen that increase, that would be great. I saw a couple of them where, like this one, for example, wasn't protested the year before. If he had protested it, he wouldn't have paid as many taxes in the long run for the next year because the homestead cap is going to be a little bit less. A lot of people have a pretty big deficit where they raise the market value up like crazy because the market deemed it. This house here was a good example. It started at 726 and then it ended up at 847. That's well above 10%. That's what they can raise. But his homestead cap wasn't able to go that high. But because it had a 10% ability to go up, they could maximize it. Now, if we'd have been able to get this maybe to 726 as the assessed value for that year, or even get that down, then within the next year, it's less likely that this is going to have so much cap to be able to push up. This isn't the best example because there's such a deficit, but it does make sense to protest your market value as much as you possibly can. You just might not see a tax return this year. It may just help you in the future. So instead of paying 10%, maybe you're paying 6% increase or 5% increase or whatever they can reasonably determine if that's the case. And even if you saw a reduction, mine stayed flat, for example. I don't think I can reasonably protest mine any lower than it is, so I'm not going to. But if you saw a reduction, there may still be an opportunity where you can go back and look and find it to go even lower. Be like, oh, thank you for the reduction. That's very nice of you. You need to keep going because the property taxes and the way that they get pulled are just not that accurate. They would argue against me on that, but they're not because they're not based hyper locally. They're not very good comps. I've had examples of some, and that's the other thing that we would do as well. You'd want to look at the comps, pull where they are, get a map. If you've got a house in Morgan's Point and it's pulling a house in South Temple or Nolanville or Copper's Cove or something like that, right? It doesn't go that far, obviously, that's Coryell County. But if it's pulling in some kind of crazy geographic location, even if it's not that far away, like here to Belton, those are not typically similar homes. And even neighborhoods are not going to be similar in a lot of ways because it's hyper local. It's based on many, many different factors. But I help you kind of look at that to try to figure out what that looks like. Now let's get into what it's going to take when you get down to the actual tax office. So we've got a report, it's prepared. We've got some reasonable understanding of what the comps are, what we think, at least at that point in time, the market could potentially bear. Now that does not necessarily mean that's what you would sell it for. Keep that in mind. But it's what we can protest to the county taxes reasonably. So we go down to the county office. They're going to first come and they're going to say, okay, well, we'll give you X amount of money. That number is usually quite arbitrary and not that much. They are capped to some degree. How much, I don't know, but they're only limited to actually lower it within a certain measure. It might be 30,000, 40,000, or a certain percentage. If you think we can reasonably get lower because that's what the numbers say, then I'd highly recommend you go all the way through the process and go to the actual committee. This committee is built of citizens, and they are designed to look at it from a non-professional standpoint. If they can reasonably determine based on the information that the county provides and the information that you provide, if you win, cool. I've only lost one case out of about 50 or more. And that's because it was a brand new build. And even then, still, it just stayed where it was. The other thing is, if you choose to do that and you go to the committee, this is an all-day process. I highly, highly recommend you just clear the whole day and be prepared to be there with everything you can. If you have foundation problems or if you have issues with the house, maybe the other homes are newer that are popping up, or there's some kind of condition factor, or it's just outdated, you can provide that as evidence and be like, hey, look, all these other homes that you provided, they are updated or they're newer. They try to stick it to age as best they can, but that doesn't always make a difference as much as some people would think it would. And so if you can prove that there's something with the house, because they don't get to be inside your home, you might have a bathroom that is inoperable and has been for 2 years. It's going to cost you $20,000, $30,000 in order to get it to run. If you sold it the way that it is, that's not going to sell for the same price as a house that has all the working bathrooms. You see what I'm saying? And if I'm going a little bit too fast for some of you, I apologize. There's a lot to uncover here, and I'm trying to keep this video short. Beyond that, you're going to go through the first phase. If this is your first time, you're going to potentially, if you think you want to, go to the actual committee. You'll sit there, wait, and then they will bring you again and do it one more time to go over your comparables. They'll take all your information, they'll scan it in, and then that will go to the committee so they can look at it. But from there, they will win again one more time, and usually with one of the really good guys. They're all really great people, by the way, but some of the guys who are on the back end are quite good at what they do to try to keep as much tax value as possible. That's their job, right? But we don't blame them. We just need to understand how the system works. So they're going to ask you again, I can reduce it by this amount. If it still doesn't fit what you think it's reasonable to determine based on the data and everything that you have, I recommend to go ahead and go to the committee. And most of the time, it's just more time. It's usually better to go there anyway. Worst case scenario, nothing changes. They can't raise your taxes. That is a very, very clear part of the code. But you stand a chance of talking to the citizens. They're usually elderly people of some sort, pretty well affluent in the area, but they're there as a volunteer basis, getting paid very, very little, but they are there for your behalf, and they look at a lot of these all day long. So be there, be kind, keep it short, keep it simple, focus on the data. The sob stories can help. A lot of it might help with, I can't, afford these taxes, they increase this and this and that. I don't take that approach, but then I'm coming at it from a very different perspective. So I can't really even advise whether or not to do that, but I would focus on the data, let them understand, here's the reasons why I don't think this is the case based on this information that is pulled by a professional, and here's the other things we have to support it. That's the approach that I would take. And so reach out to me if you would like that data. I do charge for the data because it is going to use up a little bit of time, but it's minuscule to what it would normally cost me to go and actually do these on your behalf. I don't protest very much on anybody's behalf unless it is something that I need to help save them time and they just can't do it. And it makes sense because I will take a percentage of what the actual savings are. If it's big enough and there's enough in there for both of us, then maybe that's something we can talk about. There's also some online places that you can look at that will do this for you every year, but they're going to take about half. So it's sometimes a wash, if any at all, where you can go protest on your own, and it just takes some time out of your day, if that's reasonable for you to do so. Hopefully that answers most of all the questions and kind of gives you the rundown of what to expect and how to do it. There's probably some things I didn't cover, so if you have any questions, leave a comment in the description down below, or reach out to me through my cell phone. All my contact information is in the bottom, and I hope to see you there. Well, maybe not, but we'll talk to you later. Bye.